The night air was thick with smoke and the sharp stench of blood. The screams from the great hall of the twins echoed into the darkness like the howls of dying wolves. Arya Stark stood frozen at the edge of the carnage, eyes wide and wild. Her fingers clutched the hilt of the dagger she'd stolen hours earlier, knuckles white. She had been so close, just moments away from being reunited with her mother and brother. Then the music changed. The doors slammed shut and the phrase turned. She saw her brother fall first. Robb's face still wore that familiar mix of strength and pain when the crossbow bolts ripped through his chest. His direwolf grey wind roared behind the doors of the kennel, a trapped beast made to watch its master die. Arya ran. She didn't.
Nowhere. Just that she couldn't breathe. Her feet pounded the wet earth as the chaos spilled outside. Men in stark armor screamed as fray blades turned on them.
She ducked behind barrels, stumbled into shadows, heart pounding so loud she swore it would give her away. She didn't see the bolt until it was too late. A scream tore through the courtyard, not from her lips, but from someone else. Sandor Clegane, the Hound. He had come for her. Not to save her, not out of love or loyalty, but maybe out of something darker. Guilt, perhaps. But even his monstrous rage was too late to stop the arrow that buried itself deep in her side. Arya crumpled, too, the ground like a sack of flour. Her breath hitched. The world spun. Blood soaked her tunic, warm and fast, and she knew it was bad. The Hound scooped her up, his roar shaking the night, his blade carving a brutal path through any Frey who dared near. But it didn't matter. Her eyes fluttered open in his arms.
"Did I make it?" she whispered, her voice barely there. Sandor looked down at her, the fire gone from his face. "No, little wolf," he said. "You're too late."
She tried to speak again, maybe to ask for her mother, maybe for Jon, maybe to say she was sorry for not being faster. But her lips just trembled, her eyes glazed, and Arya Stark died in the arms of the Hound, beneath a sky that did not mourn.
Her death was not a moment of glory. It was not a grand, heroic sacrifice.
It was cruel, sudden, forgotten by the victors and mourned only by the dead. But her absence would echo far beyond that blood-soaked hall. In Braavos, a girl waited for a Stark who never came. In the north, a brother's heart turned cold with vengeance, and, in the shadows of Westeros, a new legend began to stir. Not of Arya Stark, the survivor, but of the vengeance that would rise in her name. The north was quiet in the days after the Red Wedding. Too quiet. The kind of silence that settled deep in bones and whispered promises of the storm still to come. News travelled slowly, but death always outran the messengers. By the time word reached the wall, Jon Snow already knew. He felt it in his chest, a weight he couldn't shake off no matter how far he walked or how hard the wind bit his skin. The crows had brought confirmation. Robb Stark was dead. Catelyn Stark was dead. Arya Stark, missing, presumed dead. He read those words again and again until they blurred. He tried to tell himself that Arya couldn't die. She was a wolf, like
him. She'd survived Harrenhal, survived alone for so long. She couldn't just be gone, not like that, not after everything, but something inside him broke.
A quiet, crumbling kind of pain that didn't scream or lash out. It just emptied him. Sam tried to comfort him. They don't know for sure. Maybe she escaped. Maybe the Hound protected her. Jon turned away. He didn't want false hope. False hope was worse than grief. At least grief was honest. He climbed the highest watchtower and stared northward, his breath fogging in the bitter cold. He made a silent promise. If Arya is gone, then I will not let the world forget her name. They will remember the wolves. Far across the sea, in Braavos, the House of Black and White sat in silence as well. The kindly man stood at the water's edge, watching as a ship unloaded its cargo. The girl from Westeros was not among them. No coin passed into his palm, no name was whispered. He lit a single candle in the Hall of Faces, not for the girl who came to be no one, but for the girl who never had the chance. Even among the faceless, her death left a shadow. But the deepest wound festered in the Riverlands, where the Freys feasted on their betrayal. Walder Frey, smug and shriveled, boasted of how he ended a rebellion with a song and a knife. "The wolf pups are gone," he laughed. "Let the lions come now for all I care." But not all the wolves were gone. Nymeria roamed the forests still, her pack grown fierce and wild. She had felt Arya's death like a wound through the world. She had howled into the night for 3 days straight, and now she stalked the woods. Like a ghost, her pack began attacking Frey outposts in the dead of night, savagely, without warning. Not for food, not for survival, for vengeance. The north, leaderless and scattered, whispered rumors of Arya's ghost walking the halls of Winterfell, her face pale and blood-soaked. Superstition, they said, madness, but fear grew, not just in the hearts of the Freys, but among the Lannisters too. Tywin Lannister, ever cautious, demanded reports. "This Stark girl," he said coldly, "she was supposed to be a child. What could she possibly have done?" Varys answered softly. "It is not what she did, my lord. It's what her death may awaken." And awaken it did. Sansa Stark in the Vale received the news wrapped in lies. "Your brother was betrayed. Your
mother slain. Arya presumed dead. Petyr Baelish delivered the blow with gentle eyes and a hand on hers. Sansa didn't cry. She simply nodded and asked to be alone. When she reached her room, she looked into the mirror and said nothing. But something hardened in her, something that would never again be soft. Arya's death became the moment the Stark children stopped being children, each in their own world, each touched by the loss, each carrying that pain into the paths they chose. Arya was gone, but the echo of her name was only just beginning to grow into something darker, something colder, something deadly. The Riverlands had always been a place of sorrow. Villages burned, fields turned to ash, and houses gutted by war. But after the Red Wedding, something colder took root. People spoke less, laughter vanished, even the children played quietly, if they played at all. They called it the season of mourning, but it was more than grief, it was fear. The Freys had won a war, but they hadn't won peace. Their men went missing in the woods. Scouts never returned. Soldiers found with their throats torn out or their eyes pecked by crows. Some said bandits. Others whispered darker things, things that moved. Without sound, things that killed for blood alone. Then came the name. "She returns," one survivor whispered, his mind broken. The little wolf, her eyes black as coal. "She walks in shadows." Word spread like wildfire. Arya Stark had survived. Of course, she hadn't. But truth didn't matter anymore. The idea of Arya had become something else entirely. A story, a warning, a curse. And it wasn't just fear fueling it. It was someone's design.
At night, small keeps would find names carved into their gates. Frey names, Lannister names, men who'd danced at the Red Wedding. The next morning, those men would be dead. Throats slit, sometimes hanging, sometimes burned. One even had the direwolf sigil skinned onto his chest. Always a name was left behind, Arya, but the real hand behind this vengeance didn't wear a young girl's face. Her name was Lyanna, not Arya Stark, but a girl who had once served the Starks in Winterfell's kitchens. When the Boltons took the castle, she fled into the hills. After hearing about Arya's death, she snapped. Something inside her twisted, her grief turned into obsession. Arya had been her hero, her hope. So she became her. She wasn't alone, either. The Riverlands were full of people broken by the war, angry, desperate for purpose. Lyanna gave them one. She told them they were all wolves now, that they would finish what the real Arya never got to. She trained them in secret, taught them to kill quietly, not soldiers, not knights, ghosts. They called themselves the Hollow Pack. And across Westeros the myth of Arya Stark grew with every murder they left behind. Children whispered it like a prayer, lords feared it like plague. In King's Landing, Cersei laughed when the rumours reached her. A dead girl haunting the phrase, "Please, do you know how many little birds we've crushed since Robert's death?" The North breeds rot, nothing more, but even she began to worry when Qyburn brought her a letter. No signature, just a list of names. Hers was one of them. In the Vale, Sansa read the same names. Her heart stuttered when she saw Arya's written, in blood-red ink above them, struck through. Arya was dead. She knew that. But something inside her lit up. Whoever was behind this vengeance was doing it for her sister, and Sansa would not stand aside. She began sending letters, quiet, discreet, gathering names of northern bannermen, who still remembered the old ways, the old loyalties. If ghosts were rising, she would make sure they had a home to return to. The wolf in her was waking too, not the kind that hunted in the dark, the kind that built kingdoms from ruins. Meanwhile, in the free cities, word of the Hollow Pack reached even the faceless men. The kindly man frowned as he read the stories, passed between sailors and smugglers. "This is not our way," he muttered, but the waif only smiled. "What is dead may never die," she said, "but some names are worth killing for." Back in Westeros, Lyanna knelt before a fire, Arya's
name carved across her blade. Around her, her pack knelt too. They were ready. And the next name on their list?
Walder Frey. The twins stood tall and smug over the green fork, the Freys inside, fat with arrogance. Walder Frey hadn't left the halls since the Red Wedding, not out of fear, but out of sheer indulgence. Every night was a celebration, every meal a reminder that he had beaten the Starks, that he had killed a king and broken the North. But something had changed in the air. His sons were growing anxious, his guards tense, servants whispered of missing men and shadows with wolf eyes. One cook claimed she saw Arya Stark walking through the kitchens, soaked in blood, barefoot and smiling. She was dismissed the next day, found hanging from a tower the next. Walder scoffed at the rumours. "Ghost stories," he muttered, chewing, "on a greasy leg of mutton. The North has always been full of stupid stories." That same night, the blood began to flow. It started with Merritt Frey. He was found in the stables, his face mutilated, mouth sewn shut, the Stark direwolf carved into his chest. A single candle left beside him flickering low. The next day, 2 guards vanished from the gatehouse, then a cook, then one of Walder's grandsons, and still no one saw anything. By the 3rd night, panic spread. The halls were locked. No one came in. No one left. Walder demanded every passage be checked, every servant interrogated. But the Hollowpack had already been inside for days. They wore Frey armor, poured Frey wine, slept among them. Lyanna had planned this for months. Not
A siege, but a rot from within.
her people worked their way up from the kitchens to the very feast hall where the Red Wedding had been held. And now it was their turn. At midnight, a scream echoed from the southern tower. The guards ran to check, only to find it burning from the inside. When they returned, the great hall was sealed shut, and the massacre had begun. Lyanna stood atop the dais where Robb Stark had died, her face streaked with ash and blood, her voice cold. "For Arya," she whispered. Then the doors crashed open and the wolves pounced. They moved like ghosts, quick, silent, merciless. Freys were dragged from under tables, thrown against walls, choked with their own cups. No one was spared. Not sons, not grandsons, not even the Maesters. Walder Frey tried to flee through a hidden passage, but Lyanna was waiting for him. He stopped when he saw her face, young, thin, with wild eyes full of hate. For a heartbeat, he truly believed she was Arya. "You," he stammered. "You were supposed to be dead." "I am," she said, and slit his throat. Not fast, not clean, slow, with purpose. As his blood poured over the stones of his cursed hall, she whispered every name she could remember, of the fallen Starks, the bannermen, the mothers, the children. She made him listen to their names as he died. The pack didn't stay long. They burned the corpses, marked the gates with the Stark sigil, drawn in blood. Then they vanished into the night. When the sun rose over the twins, the towers stood black with smoke. The crows feasted, and every banner had been torn down, replaced by a single message scrawled in the Frey's own blood: "The North remembers." The realm woke up screaming. Lords in the Reach, the Westerlands, even Dawn, all heard of the massacre. And they all asked the same question: who did this? The name whispered on every tongue wasn't Lyanna's. It wasn't the Hollowpack. It was Arya Stark. The ghost who never made it past the Red Wedding was now haunting the dreams of the powerful. Not just a child anymore, a symbol, a reckoning, a blade that would never rust. And far to the north, Jon Snow stared into the fire at Castle Black, gripping Ghost's fur tight. "They think she's alive," Sam said gently behind him. Jon didn't turn. "Maybe she is," he whispered. "In every wolf that's left, in the Red Keep, the throne room never felt colder." Cersei Lannister stood at the top of the steps, the Iron Throne behind her like a black spider waiting to strike. Her gold-threaded gown shimmered beneath the torchlight, but her face was hard, unmoving. Jaime sat beside her, reading the letter. Aloud again, slower this time. No sigil, no seal, just a list of names written in dried blood. Cersei Lannister, Jaime Lannister, Tywin Lannister, Gregor Clegane, Eileen Payne, Meryn Trant. At the top, Arya Stark. Struck through. "This is absurd," Jaime said flatly.
Arya Stark is dead. Everyone knows that. Cersei's eyes didn't move. "Do they?" He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. The Red Wedding had shattered the North, but what came after? The killings, the disappearances, the massacre.
At the twins, none of it made sense. They hadn't been political assassinations. They weren't part of any noble rebellion. They were personal, intimate, revenge dressed as justice. Cersei turned to Qyburn. Find whoever sent this. Torture the answer out of every rat if you must. Qyburn nodded with a slight smile. As you command, Your Grace. But even he didn't believe this was an ordinary threat. Later that night, Cersei sat alone in her chambers, staring at the parchment. Arya's name struck through. That small, skinny girl from Winterfell who'd stared at her with quiet hatred, hiding behind Ned Stark's leg. She's not a ghost, Cersei whispered to herself. She's a story someone is using to scare us. Yet even as she said it, her fingers trembled. She ordered the city gates sealed, her guards tripled, spies sent to the north, to Braavos, to every whispering alley in Flea Bottom. Still, the paranoia crawled into her bones like winter chill. But the real danger wasn't coming from the shadows of King's Landing. It was already there. The hollow pack had scattered after the twins, not to hide, but to embed. One by one, they began slipping into cities, towns, and strongholds, posing as servants, sellswords, beggars. Lyanna had spent months building this, not just to kill, but to unravel. And now they were in the capital. One served wine in the Red Keep. Another swept floors in the Great Sept. A third posed as a seamstress in the brothels Cersei's spies used so freely. They were everywhere, and their first target in King's Landing wasn't Cersei, it was Sir Meryn Trant. He liked little girls. Everyone knew he beat them, broke them, paid for silence. One night he didn't come home. His body was found in a brothel cellar. Eyes gouged out, tongue nailed to the floor, carved into his chest. "The list," Cersei snapped. "Lock the city, no one in or out until this rat is found." But fear doesn't follow orders. The small folk began whispering again. "She's here," they said. "The wolf girl. She's killing the names." The Lannisters tried to spin it as a rebellion, a northern plot, some trick of the Martells or Tyrells. But no one believed it, because the killings weren't loud or grand. They were pointed, intimate, meant for one person at a time. The next was ill in pain, headless, his tongue sewn where his mouth used to be. Jaime stood over the body and said nothing. For once, his sword hand twitched where it used to be. He'd killed for Cersei, lied for her. But now his name was next. Even Tywin, cold as winter steel, tightened security around the Tower of the Hand. He didn't fear war, but he feared ghosts. And as King's Landing simmered in dread, somewhere deep in the woods outside the city, Lyanna carved one more name into her blade, Cersei. The lioness would bleed last, but she would bleed the longest. Cersei had always believed in one simple truth. Fear was power, and when fear failed, fire finished the job. The city gates were shut. Gold cloaks patrolled day and night. Spies were tortured. Ravens intercepted. Every whorehouse raided. Every tavern searched. The streets of King's Landing were quiet, not with peace, but dread. The people whispered behind closed doors, and when they walked fast. The Lannisters were bleeding, and they didn't know where the blade was. "I want their heads," Cersei hissed, pacing before the Iron Throne. Her gown flowed like blood behind her. "Find these wolves and put them on spikes. Burn them if you must. Let the city see what happens when they mock House Lannister." But there was nothing to burn. The hollow pack had faded back into the way shadows. Like Arya once had, they wore other faces, other names. And the city, once Cersei's stage, had become their hunting ground. Her allies were falling fast. Qyburn was the next to die. He was found in his lab beneath the Red Keep, eyes wide in horror, face contorted, mouth stuffed with a wolf's fang. No struggle, no noise, nothing taken except a single page torn from his journals, scrawled with one word in red: justice. Cersei didn't sleep that night. Jaime tried to calm her, to hold her, but she pushed him away. "You never understood," she snapped. "They don't want to kill a queen. They want to humiliate her, dismantle her, make her bleed slow." He watched her carefully. "And what will you do?" "Remind them who they fear." So she ordered wildfire. Barrels upon barrels of the cursed green flames hidden beneath the city since the days of the Mad King. She would burn the slums, cleanse the warrens. "Smoke out the wolves," she said, her voice venom-soft, "even if I have to burn half the city." But wildfire is not a loyal weapon. That same night, one of the Hollow Pack infiltrated the Alchemists' Guild. He was a boy, no older than 16. No one noticed him as he mixed powders, as he walked through the corridors, humming softly until the explosion. The southern quarter of the city went up in flames, not by Cersei's hand, but her own weapon turned against her. Hundreds died, screams filled the air, green fire lit up the sky, and in the chaos, Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain Reborn, was found beheaded in the Red Keep's courtyard, his head placed neatly on the steps, a lone wolf carved into his skull. Cersei stood at her balcony watching the city burn, eyes wild. Not with sorrow, but with rage. "They want a monster," she whispered. "I'll show them one." She called the small council together, what was left of it. Demanded more fire, more soldiers, more walls, but fear had already won. Half her guards deserted by morning, the other half refused to march into the fire. The people began to riot. Bread riots turned to looting. Looting turned to lynchings. And everywhere, painted on walls, carved into doors, chanted in alleyways, the North remembers. Even Tommen, her son, began to ask questions. "Mother," he said softly, "was Arya really bad?" Cersei slapped him. He didn't ask again, and then came the whisper, the one that chilled her bones. They were inside the keep, already. One of them wearing a lion's face. Cersei ordered every servant brought before her. She stared into their eyes, searching for flickers, for lies, for her, because in her heart she believed it now. Arya hadn't died. She had come back to finish what the Red Wedding started, and Cersei Lannister, Queen Regent, Lioness of the Rock, was next. Snow fell heavy across the north, burying bones and secrets alike. At Castle Black, Jon Snow stood at the edge of the world, watching the white horizon with empty eyes. Ghost padded beside him, quiet and still, sensing the storm in his master's heart. The wind howled, but it wasn't just the cold that gnawed at him. It was the weight of vengeance. He'd heard everything. The massacre at the Twins, the killing of Freys, the whispers in King's Landing. All done in Arya's name, all for a sister whose body he never saw, who had died in the arms of the Hound while trying to reach the only family she had left. She hadn't made it, but something had. Not just a myth, a movement. He received a raven 2 nights ago. No seal, No signature, just a strip of wolf pelt tied around a roll of parchment. Inside, a list of names. Most had already been crossed off. Only a few remained. At the top, written in blood, Cersei Lannister. Jon had read it in silence. Then he'd burned it. Not out of fear, but because the fire gave him peace. For the first time in weeks, his breathing slowed. Arya was gone, but her name was now more powerful than her sword ever was. "I'm going south," he told Sam, packing light. His tone was flat. "Final!" "You'll die down there," Sam said, terrified. "The Lannisters will never let you walk free. Cersei's killing everyone, even children." "I'm not going to talk," Jon said, slipping his father's sword,
Longclaw, onto his back. "I'm going to remind them what the North does to wolves who are hunted."
Sam didn't stop him. No one did. As Jon crossed into the North proper, word spread fast. The bastard of Winterfell was marching south, alone. Some said he'd lost his mind. Others said he was following the ghost of Arya. But there were those who heard his steps and stood up. Houses forgotten by the south. Hill tribes and bannerless men. Orphans of war, broken old men who'd once ridden for Ned Stark. They came out of the woods, from ruins, from caves and collapsed holds. They brought rusted swords, broken shields, and stories on their tongues. They didn't fight for a crown, they fought for Arya, they fought for vengeance. And with every mile Jon marched, more joined. Meanwhile, in the Vale, Sansa Stark watched the North rise again. She'd spent her months playing the game, listening, smiling, staying quiet as Pater Baelish whispered into her ear. But not any more. When she heard Jon had crossed the neck, she sent ravens to every contact she had, secret or sworn. One sentence written again and again. The wolf that was lost leads the pack. Even Brienne, watching silently by her side, felt the shift. Sansa's eyes had changed, softer when she looked north, colder when she looked at the Eyrie. Sansa had mourned Arya in silence. Now she ruled in her name, and in Braavos, far across the narrow sea, in the quiet black temple of the House of Black and White, the kindly man stared at the pool of still water. "The girl is gone," he said aloud, though no one had spoken. Behind him the waif smiled faintly. "She became something more." "Not one of us," he said. "No," the waif whispered. "Something worse." The faceless men do not believe in vengeance. But vengeance had taken their gift and twisted it into a blade. Back in King's Landing, Cersei watched as the last of her allies bled away. The city was crumbling. Her enemies were not armies, not banners, but shadows, ideas. Wolves without faces, and then came the final letter. It wasn't written in blood, it wasn't written at all. It was a drawing, a little girl, drawn in charcoal, holding a needle-thin sword, smiling beneath a tree full of hanging men. No name, no threat, just a reminder. Arya Stark was dead. But what she stood for, that was very much alive. The Iron Throne sat cold and empty. Cersei hadn't entered the throne room in days. The fires had long stopped burning outside, but the smoke still lingered in the city, thick, bitter, choking. The Red Keep was no longer a palace. It was a cage. Every corner filled with silence, every shadow carrying her name, Arya. The Hollow Pack had dismantled her world one name at a time. Meryn Trant, Eileen Payne, Qyburn, even the Mountain. Gone. slain in the quiet, brutal way only someone deeply personal could manage. And now she was alone. Jaime had left, whether in guilt or shame, she didn't know. Maybe to die somewhere quietly. Maybe to find Sansa and beg forgiveness he didn't deserve. Cersei stayed. She still believed she could win, that there was always one more play, one more fire to start, one more lie to spread, but she no longer knew who her enemies were, because Arya Stark was not one girl anymore. She was 100 knives in the dark, 1,000 names whispered in vengeance, and she was inside the Red Keep. Lyanna had waited, watched. For weeks she and the remnants of her pack had blended in. Servants, whores, couriers, even a mute cupbearer who passed Cersei wine each night. They could have killed her already, but death wasn't the point. Ruin was. On the morning of the Queen's last day, the bells rang again, not for war, but for judgment. Jon Snow had reached the gates, the North had followed him. Not in banners, but in blood, from Winterfell to White Harbour, from Bear Island to the Neck. They had come for justice, for memory, for the girl who never made it past the Red Wedding. Cersei stood before the Iron Throne, surrounded by guards who didn't look her in the eye. Her dress was black, her crown heavy. Her hands trembled as she held a goblet of wine, stained red. The throne room doors opened. Jon walked in first. Behind him, Sansa, and behind her, a girl with dark hair, eyes grey and silent, hands wrapped in cloth, a small blade at her hip. Cersei froze. It wasn't Arya, but it could have been. Jon's eyes met hers, full of that same tired sorrow she remembered from Eddard Stark. But it was Sansa who stepped forward. "You tried to erase our house," Sansa said softly. "You murdered our brother, our mother, our sister." Cersei sneered, voice brittle. "She was nothing, a little rat with a blade." "She was the start of something you can't kill," Sansa said. "And now you'll see how it ends." Cersei laughed, though it sounded more like a cough. "You think I fear death?" "No," Jon said. "We think you earned it." Lyanna stepped forward, blade drawn, small, simple, clean. Not for glory, for closure. Cersei stared at her. For a moment, she saw Arya's face, and for the first
time in her life she looked afraid. "I should have killed her when I had the chance," she whispered. "You did," Lyanna said.
And she still won. Then the blade slipped beneath her ribs. No cheers followed, no songs. Only silence as the Queen bled across the stone floor, her crown rolling to a stop beside her outstretched hand. The wolves stood over her, not out of celebration, but remembrance. Arya was gone. But the idea of her, the fury, the defiance, the refusal to be forgotten, that had outlived them all. When it was over, Jon refused the throne. Sansa took it instead, not in King's Landing, but
in the North. The South would rebuild, rule itself. The North.
The North would remember, and as the hollow pack disappeared, as Lyanna walked into shadow once more, whispers followed her, that Arya Stark had risen, that she lived again. In every girl who learned to fight, in every name spoken for the dead, in every silence before the blade. The world forgot a lot about House Stark, but it would never forget her. Not the girl who died at the Red Wedding, but the ghost who came after.